So we have to push not only like the sharpen slider or the R sharp mask in Photoshop or do the high pass, sharpening technique. There's all these different things that we do to create the illusion of high quality. So like now my eye is not as good as it was, I think, because I'm so used to pushing things. But to answer your question, as silly as it sounds, if I'm using Lightroom, for example, the sharpening slider has like a little red gradient that once you start getting to the red, it's warning you like, hey, you don't want to go this far unless you really intend to. So I try to like keep it below the red, and that's what I do. Also, another tip, to be quite frank with you, is I do go into the if you're using Lightroom camera or Camera Raw, you can, go into the masking drop down, because when you drag the slider, there's a little drop down next to it, the sharpening slider. If you expand that, there's a masking slider, and if you hold Alt on Windows or Option on the Mac and drag that slider, you can actually see where the sharpening effect is applied, and the further right you drag that slider, it will be concentrated more on the edges of the image rather than other details that you may not want to include that sharpening effect, and that also can help alleviate some issues.
That's definitely something I do. I always use the sharpening mask, just to,
Mhm.
dial that back to minimum. The other thing that I've noticed in my own editing is, especially since the advent of, the clarity slider in
Yes.
Lightroom,
Yes.
which everyone went way overboard with when that first
Yes.
came out. Um, but my sense is always that a number of different processes that I use to get the look that I want to get, all adds up to the impression of sharpening.
Mhm.
Um, and what I find is then when I apply the final sharpening at the very end, it very quickly kicks the whole thing overboard. Like for instance,
Mhm.
I like a bit of clarity because I like that
Mhm.
contrast. I like contrasty
Sure.
things. And the minute you dial up the contrast, you sort of create the illusion of something being sharper than it
Mhm.
actually is.
Mhm.
And then it's really easy to just you know, go way overboard with that.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know if this has happened to you, but a lot of the times, if I come back to something I edited 2 weeks ago and I look at it, I'm like, "Oh my god, this is too much," and then
Yeah.
I'll dial it back a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also noticed that, the screen makes a huge difference.
Yes, yes.
That's for some reason I like editing on that 5K screen behind me,
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
because to me I can see things better on it. It's just,
Mhm.
it's a different sort of visual experience, and I think I can keep myself in check better
Right.
than when I edit something on my laptop, for example, which is generally
Mhm.
not a
Yeah.
good idea.
Another tip that I would give people is to view the image at 100%, also actual size, rather than zoom in really close or zoom out, because when you're viewing it at 100% or actual size is the closest representation to what it actually looks like, rather than a scaled down or scaled up or scaled down version of it when you're viewing it.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that I come across a lot is that kind of plasticky skin look,
Mhm.
where,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yep.
and I think that's actually, that's kind of gotten worse recently since the advent of, certain AI tools in
Mhm.
Lightroom,
Yeah.
and additional, um, software packages, like, Apathy, for example, or,
Mhm.
what is it, Portrait Pro,
Mhm.
things like that,
Mhm.
where all of a sudden you very quickly end up falling into the trap of
Yeah.
adding all of these effects on top of each
Mhm.
other. You may do some skin smoothing in Lightroom,
Yeah.
to start with, then you hit Evoto or Apathy or something, and
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Mhm.
by the end of it, you get the final result, and you're like, "Whoa, okay, something's
Yeah.
something's
But,
way overshot here."
it's funny that you're bringing this up. The way that I equate it to is, when 3D animation first started getting popular, it looked too clean, too perfect. We're
Yes.
talking about maybe late 90s or something. It just looks too perfect. And I think that's where we are right now with all these tools that you mentioned, like Evoto. I actually do like Evoto a lot. It's a very good app. Um, but I think that eventually we're gonna move to kind of where animation is now, where it looks more real because it's imperfect. It doesn't look super straight. There's imperfections. There's imperfections in reality, and I think that's what all these tools unfortunately remove. But I don't think it's the fault of the tool. I think it's the fault of the artists who are working on these images, because it's very easy to just drag a slider and just everything disappears, rather than before where you had to do everything manually. You had to do everything, using frequency separation or God knows what, before. And so you had a lot of choice in what you are editing. Now, since you just drag a slider, everything goes away. So it makes it easy to go overboard. So I think the solution eventually would be for artists to, not to be aware of what they're doing. And this actually leads me to another point where I am not against AI or any of these tools that do automatic fixes by just dragging a slider. The way that I see it is we were always art directing. Even before all these AI tools, we were always art directing. The only difference is that before we were using our hand and our mouse and we would drag the spot healing brush tool over an area or whatever it was. Now we may do a selection and type in a prompt, but we're still art directing. It's my value as an artist is not that I know a keyboard shortcut that you don't know or where to find a menu, in a drop down. Um, it's I'd like to think at least that my value is my eye, and now we're having new interfaces to output the art that we want to create, and that's why I don't think AI is dangerous because it was never that, "Oh, I was so good at using the clone stamp tool, and now AI does it in 2 seconds." Like, no, like, that's never been my value.
I think you're right. I mean, I think we're in this sort of phase where it's like you said, we're getting used to these new tools, and
Mhm,
just like, and I remember it really well, when Lightroom first came out, the clarity slider,
mhm,
and
mhm,
everybody just went
mhm,
crazy. Everything you saw on, like, face people putting stuff on
mhm.
Facebook, you go, what the heck could happen there?
Yep,
But of
yeah,
course, it's also sort of a sign of the time, because I remember at the time everybody was like, oh, this looks really cool because it's like new and different.
mhm,
And now I look back at some images that I remember it was, let me see, it must have been around 2013, around about
mhm,
that time. And sometimes, like, especially on Facebook, other platforms are
mhm.
available, but sometimes, these things pop up, yeah, on this day 9 years ago, right? And
Yeah,
then your
yeah,
post
yeah.
was on, and so I see some of the images that I post back down. I'm thinking, what the hell? Oh my god!
But that's a good thing. I always tell people that's a good thing because if you still think they look good, it means you haven't improved.
Yeah, but exactly, absolutely, you're absolutely right. That's exactly how I look at it. But it's funny, it's funny, and you can see the
Mhm.
preference of certain tools
Yes.
at certain times,
Yes.
And I tell you what, I find at the moment, because I feel personally, I feel I'm in this transitional period where, I'm taking advantage of some of those AI tools because they save me time and they make my
Mhm.
work, they simplify
Sure.
my workflow, and and
Absolutely.
that's great. Um, but I'm also still learning how to really fit them into my workflow in order to
Mhm.
get the result that I want to get. And I'm also finding that, there's always compromises
Mhm.
that have to be made. Like, the result is never going to be totally identical with the thing that I hand retouched. You mentioned frequency separation. Loved it. Lisa told me everything I know.
Mhm. Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
um, and and I like the process. I actually I like the process.
There's
Uh,
something therapeutic about it for me.
Absolutely, I like the painting. I like that. I like the control that I have. I like the way I can
Mhm.
shape a face. Um, I like the fact that I'm in control of the degree of realism or not. That
Mhm.
I just like that haptic feel of doing it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and with tools, more modern tools, slider based tools, let's say, I always find, at the moment at least, I find that I apply them, and I find that there's a point where I feel that's gone too far. Then I dial it back. Then I still go into Photoshop and I still use frequency separation
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
adjust certain things so they are where I want them to be. So it hasn't, to me, at least at the moment, it hasn't gotten rid of these. I mean, I don't know. It feels idiotic to call them traditional processes or
Yeah.
editing because they're really not. But do you know what I mean? I mean, frequency separation being a good example. Um,
Well, the thing with that is I struggle with the same, and I don't know if it's because I'm just, like, old school and I'm like, "Oh, screw it, it's a lot easier for me to do it, the old way,"
Yeah.
or if it's really like, "You know what? This slider's not that good, and if maybe I could get the same result by using 3 or 4 sliders or different filters or whatever, but, like, I know how to do it frequency separations, I'm just gonna do it there," like, so I
Yeah.
still don't know if I'm where I am personally in that battle, but I
Yeah.
feel that maybe I mean, so I'm someone who, like, really, really not only studies every tool in Photoshop, not only am I involved in the Photoshop uh, pre-release, but like I do talk to a lot of the engineers before some of the tools make it to like even beta. So like I'm well aware how a lot of this stuff works. And even then, I'm like, I still think some of the old stuff, again, to use that word old, is better, or faster or easier for me at least. And I don't think it's because I'm just been using Photoshop forever and I'm just like a, get off my lawn old man wanting to use, the clone stamp tool or whatever. But I do find that some of these, again, perfect example, channels. Channels have been the same since Photoshop was created and they're still useful today. And I haven't found a tool that does everything channels can do, like, for example, for making selections or, different types of things. So there you go, there's some tools that will always be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing for me is, there's certain elements, like when I think of a tool like Aperty, for example,
Mhm.
or or Photo, there's certain elements where I'm sold. Eyes,
Yeah.
sold,
Mhm.
completely
Yes.
sold.
Mhm.
Um, hair, not really, not sold at
Mhm.
all.
Mhm.
Skin, I'm battling with that.
It for certain things is great, and see, this is the thing, like, when people tell me, "Oh, well, I found this tool," we'll say about, "Oh, it's better at Photoshop than X, Y, and Z." I'm like, "Yeah, it is, 100%. There's no argument there, but Photoshop is better at everything. Meaning, if you know how to use Photoshop, nothing is as good as Photoshop. Now, if the argument is this particular tool is better than Photoshop at this particular task and you can do it 2 times faster, I will agree all day long.
Yeah,
And I am not saying you should only use Photoshop. I'm saying use every tool at your disposal that helps you get your work done. But ultimately, in my opinion, you're going to put it all together in Photoshop. Because usually what I do is I have used Devoto and I do use it. And I just, bring my image right back into Photoshop and it just becomes one of the edit layers or retouch layers or whatever I call it.
correct. Actually, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I do. It comes back. My workflow is, I don't know. I have no idea how common it is. But my workflow, yeah, I start in Lightroom. I
Hmm.
then usually, hop into something else. It then lands in Photoshop,
Hmm.
especially if there's like compositing to do, I need to fix
Sure.
backgrounds or whatever. And
Yeah.
then I always end up back in Lightroom for some final touches.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that's kind of how, I don't know, that's how I naturally function. And that's just, you know, so things, tools like Evolver or Apathy to me, it's just another thing that actually speeds up certain things. And
Hmm.
as a,
Yes.
as a portrait and headshot photographer, a lot of the time is money. It's just really as
Hmm.
simple as that.
Yes.
I don't really have the luxury to spend as much time as I want on a project because it immediately means that it becomes less lucrative for me because,
Yes. But it goes back to you being an art director, right? So like you're making an executive decision. Is me spending 2 hours on this using frequency separation worth it? Or am I gonna get a result that's, I hate saying good enough, but that it's as good or almost as good, 98% there, but then do it in like 10% of the time. You're gonna make that decision. And
and yeah, you're
yeah,
right.
no.
And the other thing is, of course, this is in my job. It's there's always the central question: is how good is good enough?
Hmm.
Because the the end use of it is absolutely central for me in how far I push the editing. Like
Yeah.
a good
Hmm.
example, would be the job is create email signature images that are 190 by 190 pixels.
Hmm.
Uh, there's absolutely zero reason why I should dive into the depth of skin retouching for that because
Hmm.
nobody's ever going to see that,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um, on the contrary, if I'm doing something that ends up on a billboard or on the side of a bus or something like that,
Ugh.
completely different story. That's a completely different thing. And so likewise, for a regular, a headshot that will only ever exist in digital form, potentially be on somebody's website, maybe be used as a LinkedIn profile picture, on social media. There's also sort of a limit as to how far
Hmm.
I'll take it, and therefore certain AI-based tools will come in really handy
Hmm.
because they completely cut out certain elements. Like I
Yeah.
mentioned eyes earlier. To me,
Hmm.
I don't. Once I've run a portrait through Aperty and let Aperty do its eye enhancement, there's virtually nothing
Hmm.
I have left to do on these
Hmm.
eyes.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah, no,
With that.
absolutely. Absolutely. Same here. Like, can I do it manually? Sure. But why am I spending the time doing that when a tool like that could do it just by dragging a couple sliders?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip, then press here for the full episode in glorious Technicolor. Hey, and don't forget to subscribe.